thinking about, I said it before, but we're all teachers and we're all learners. And when I go to a campus and I'm teaching them about student success, I'm a teacher. I know what I'm talking about. But there's the majority of the time where I'm a learner and people are saying things and I'm like, that's so remarkable. I want to hear more about that. Showing up in the world that way, I think, is the spirit of what we're saying with curiosity.
I mean, that really is the power of being in higher education, right? Is that you're surrounded with smart people and you're able to explore ideas. So I think getting into the place where I appreciate what Scott had, as he's concluding his book and saying, here are a couple of things like cautions for you, but ultimately like how to be wired for in your identity to be curious.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 3 of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources, joined today by Matt Boisvert. Hey, Matt.
Hi, Rachel.
Anybody who's watching is like, huh? What's going on?
Matt's mic's off.
So first of all, we're in Austin. Matt has just finished ICUT, which is a great conference.
Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas, which, is a pretty big deal.
Big deal. Z has recently moved to Austin, so I have been here to see her, although she's not been feeling well. But also we're in the same place. See, that's my hand. So everyone's going to be like, why do you keep looking this way? But we're actually sitting next to each other, unlike normally where you're in a different room.
True.
All right. That also means that we do not have any of the accoutrement that I am used to. I don't have any paper. I haven't printed my articles. I'm going to try to use my iPad. So we're just going to have to practice flexibility.
It's a good thing you're flexible,
Yes, for sure. All right. We are going to revisit our theme for the year, which is curiosity. We're going to talk about our book for the year. In fact, this is the last time we're going to talk about it, and then we're going to start a new one. So that's going to be exciting. But in the vein of curiosity, Matt, we have 2 weeks in a row forgotten to talk about our pigeon picture.
Yeah.
So
it was like the number one clicked story in our newsletter.
Yeah. So it was for our very first episode. Matt was trying to teach some people on our team how to do our newsletters. In case you don't know, we have a Cap and Gown newsletter, which is just all about the articles that we talk about and that sort of thing. And he put in a picture that my husband had sent me of a pigeon that had flown into the window and left this perfect imprint of the pigeon. Put it in like as a placeholder for the actual picture we were going to put in about starting our new season, but then we forgot to take it out. So if you got the newsletter, you got to see that amazing picture of the pigeon imprint. We're not sad about it though, because we kind of feel like sometimes starting the school year can feel like that, right?
Also, the pigeon may have been stunned, but he was not ultimately harmed.
He was not injured.
Yeah.
He flew away. So no pigeons were harmed in the taking of that picture. All right. Normally, I ask you to do some curiosity things, but since we're in Austin, you've forgotten your book. But I looked up, we're actually recording today from the Driscoll, which is very near the Capitol. So I have some random facts about the Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Former President Lyndon Baines Johnson had a secret passageway from his favorite suite to the hog parlor. So he didn't have to come down like all the general people.
Right there.
Okay. He had a little back. The portrait of Colonel Driscoll in the lobby has 2 restored bullet holes from a duel in the early 1900s.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing.
That's cool.
Okay, 2 more. Room 525. Some say this room is haunted by the ghost of 2 young brides who committed suicide there.
My brother told me about that.
And the Driscoll not only hosted LBJ when he awaited the results of his Senate race in 1948, but you did not know this. It is also the location of the first date he ever had with Lady Bird in 1934.
I did not know that.
So that's pretty fun. All right, there's your curious facts. So Matt, let's do our Google searches. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, you go first.
Okay. Well, so my first one is LL Flooring, which I didn't know, but apparently this is a big deal that it's going bankrupt because did you see the LL Flooring car drive down the street? It was driving back and forth in Abilene. I didn't even know we had an LL Flooring in Abilene.
Oh,
But we do.
I see. What
Anyway,
you're telling
there
me.
was a big story about how this was a big deal because it was a major competitor to Home Depot.
Oh,
And it's going bankrupt.
Okay.
But I had to look it up. Okay, illicit AI research last week. We had Sherry Woosley. Dr. Woosley told us about illicit. The next one is the largest U.S. football stadium. So looking at the size of all the stadiums in the
what's
U.S.
the answer?
I knew you were going to ask me that. It's
come
Michigan.
on.
It's Michigan.
Okay. All right, keep going.
Okay. I had to look up room 525 in the Driscoll Hotel because you
Haunted.
just said. And then Stamford Carnegie Library. Braden went on a Texas tour. She took her family. They went to Stamford, Texas. And I was talking to Lois, whose father grew up in Stamford, Lois from iCut. And I said, did you know that they have a Carnegie Library? And she's like, what? So I had to look it up. They do.
Nice. That's good. Okay. Well, I should have gone first because everyone's going to be like, wow, Matt's the smart one of that pair. I looked up Edward Scissorhands because we've had a discussion with Beetlejuice and what's Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Is it Edward Scissors Hands or Edward Scissorhands? It's Edward Scissorhands. Okay. I think it's wrong, but that's what it is. I had to look up the bell schedule because I was trying to figure out, I needed someone to pick up my daughter.
This is a thing that I never really, but I also have bell schedule because this is a thing I never knew I was going to need.
To know where your kids are and when you can get them.
But when lunch is like at 11:22.
Yeah, and you have 20 minutes, so you need to know those things.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3, homemade dog treats, because I have 2 dogs. Their birthday was like 3 weeks ago and we keep forgetting to celebrate. So this weekend, for real though, we're going to do our celebration.
I feel pretty good that they're not going to know.
Yeah, that's what I keep telling my daughter. Number 4 is high yield savings. Everybody should put their money in a high yield savings account. There's your what's it called? PSA for the day. And then the last one is Owala, which is a water bottle. I had to buy a new water bottle. Here's why I wanted to tell you about this though. Owala has a straw, but it's like a sipping, it's like you just drink it like a cup, but it's actually a straw.
It's a sippy cup.
Kind of. But what my daughter said, why these are so popular now is because, are you ready? Drinking from a straw gives you smoker's lines. That is the middle school wisdom.
They're thinking ahead.
I guess so. So, all right, that's my Google. That's what I have for my Google search.
30 years from now, you'll be like, you were drinking
from a straw, weren't you? All right, let's do the State of the Union.
Actually, I'm a little worried here. Maybe all of it's dropped.
Now, can we do the State of the Union?
I don't see it.
This is great because Bailey made a slide for us that says we're experiencing technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, my little timer is still going.
Hold on. Let me look on. Are we back? Yep. They can see us. We just can't see each other except that we're sitting next to each other. So let's do the State of the Union, shall we? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first one that I want to talk about is the NCAA. So you remember I told you that they just settled. And then this judge, like 2 years ago, was like, nope, we're going to go back to the drawing board on that. I know that you guys settled for $2.8 billion. It's not enough. We actually need you to find more, because this agreement is going to unfairly limit what athletes can receive from a group of sports boosters. So remember, the NCAA made a bunch of concessions because they were very stressed out about how much money they eventually were going to have to pay. And so they're like, did a kind of quick rush to settle. But this judge is very unhappy. The included in this agreement is a revenue sharing model going forward, in which colleges that choose to participate would agree to distribute roughly a fifth of their annual income, about $20 million, to their players. The judge is like, it's not enough. You've got to figure out what you're going to do there. So a really big problem that the judge is underlying this agreement is that the NCAA has to be able to differentiate between legitimate compensation for NIL and pay for play without unfairly limiting the flow of money to athletes. So it's pretty interesting to see what's going to happen. And Matt, you were saying today, someone was like, yeah, they rushed into that. It's going to start to come undone because they didn't think of all the things that they needed.
Higher ed attorney was saying, he was shocked at how quickly they all agreed.
Yeah.
And then he just said, the longer it takes, it'll start to unravel.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, the next one I'm super happy to highlight. This is a school in Connecticut, Sacred Heart University, which we have the pleasure to serve. There's a great article in the University Business about the president and how he's thinking about something that he's calling presence on their campus. So he's asking questions like, can your students recognize the dean of their college if they passed by in a hallway? Would your students feel comfortable striking up a conversation? And would the dean be mindful enough to ask them about their classes? This is the kind of cornerstone of what he's making this community to be, where you know who people are, you introduce yourself, and you actually have real conversations with them. So their enrollment is incredible. It's increased through the pandemic, and their most recent fall enrollment tipped north of 2,000 first-year students. And he's like, I really attribute that to being able to be successful and present and hear what's going on with our students. Also, though, they've just bought a nearby high school. It's the Notre Dame Prep High School, where 20% of those students have historically gone to their campus. And now they're really investing in that and creating a great pipeline for some of those minority and underserved students. So they have a whole program where they're enrolling students from that high school. It's like Upward Bound, except times 100. So the president was saying in this article that those students in that program are 4 times more likely to graduate from college than the average college student. So I think that's awesome. They're really investing in the community and theaters and athletics and all of that sort of thing. And what's really interesting, Matt, we've talked actually a couple of weeks about the value of college and how we're saying, is it just about career, or is it also about some of these liberal art things? And their president is like, listen, we are not moving to vocational skills. We're not sacrificing our love of the humanities. They're actually adding bachelor's degrees in music and renovating theaters and that sort of thing. So I think what's so important about that is this idea of knowing where you are and serving those people, right? So it's not like a blanket, okay, everyone should go to vocational, like the school we talked about last week. Everybody should become, more entrenched in liberal arts. Actually, you need to know where you are and who the students are that you can serve, and then you need to figure out how to do that really well. So I love that.
For sure.
Okay, I don't have very much to say about this one, except there's an article inside Higher Ed about how college rankings are really losing influence. You and I covered this, I think, sometime last year, that they're just not as important to students and their parents. They're kind of understanding that better as a sort of competition between colleges and not really giving students the meat of what they need to understand about a college, which I think is pretty interesting. A lot of our smaller schools have made the argument that those rankings are really helpful to them because it puts them on a national stage where maybe you wouldn't necessarily know to look up a smaller independent school. So there's some schools that really, really love that ranking game. And then there are other schools that are just like, we know who we serve and we have a pipeline to them. And so we're not going to have anything to do with that. But Matt, I told you yesterday I was having coffee and sitting next to me were two high school students who were talking about choosing college. And it was so interesting to hear their organic conversation about thinking about price and about where it's located and what the programs are, and that back and forth of what's important and how they're investing in choosing what their school is. Really, really instructive. I was curious. I would have liked to have gone over and been like, hi, can I hear more about what you're, but instead I just eavesdropped on them. So I think that was a good choice there. All right, related to our all of our technical difficulties that we're having right now. This is so interesting. I was just telling Z before we started, there's an article in, let me give you the source, again, Inside Higher Ed, about how professors believe print textbooks are more effective for learning. So fewer than 10% of college courses now solely require physical textbooks, down from 20% 2 years ago. But professors still believe paper books are more effective than their digital counterparts. And the vast majority of the faculty members surveyed, about 81%, believe digital textbooks allow students more flexibility, but nearly half think that physical textbooks are better for learning. So this is really interesting, right? Because they're like, we know that it allows you to be more flexible, but we really want you to have a paper book. And there's a lot of data details in this article. But I think the interesting thing about this article is just the idea that we're having conversations about people who are raised in education on books. Like, that's my preference. I like holding a book. I like having a highlighter. That's how I learn to learn, right? And that's what our faculty are saying. Like, hey, you need to have the book, you need to whatever. Well, I will tell you, I have classes where I have electronic textbooks and I see the benefit of both. Like, I can go in and say, I remember a sentence in this book that says this, search for the word accountability. And then it's like, look, here's where you highlighted that in the book, right?
I mean, you've seen me with my printed hard copy textbook, where just talking with Sherry Woosley, where that triggers a memory. And I remember a graphic in one of my textbooks from grad school, and went and found it, right?
Right.
I don't know that would have been triggered the same way if it was an electronic version.
But it is amazing to be able to search your textbooks for keywords and to be able to say, show me everything I've highlighted. So in my textbook, it will say, here's the 72 pages and the sentences that you've highlighted in that, which then gives you sort of a summary. Like, there's an arc of what's happening in the book that's important to you. So I don't know. I think everybody has different preferences, but it is another case, Matt, I think, of where there's new technology coming out and we as adults don't know how to use it well. So we're like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. Right. And then you have students who are like, no, actually, I love it. It actually makes a lot of sense to me. And I would rather do that than have a book. So I think it's a great conversation.
I think it fits right in with our conversation about curiosity, because you're bringing to this some assumptions and biases that maybe you should just put on the shelf.
Yeah.
And try something else out.
And just ask some questions about how people are experiencing that. So pretty interesting. I would love in just like in a FYE class, right, to just say, let's talk about textbooks. How do you feel about a paper? And obviously there's different experiences there, right? Like, if I'm reading my favorite book, I want a book. If it's a textbook, maybe I want to have it electronic so I can search it. So pretty interesting. Okay, I have two more for you. The first one made me think of our friend Brian Dawson, who we need to have on Cap and Gown.
For sure.
He does some really amazing things with outdoor education and parks and wildlife. And I don't know if you can explain, like, just very briefly, kind of the programs that he's done with that.
Yeah, I mean, he basically started a club, a group of students who their goal was to visit as many national parks as they could. And it became just a really tight group. Of course, he loves to do that, to travel and hike, and then to be able to share that with others.
So this article is about how wilderness programs, specifically around pre-orientation. So before everybody comes to campus, you're doing pre-orientation by going out and hiking or doing some trail or doing some camping or something like that. And there's a lot of evidence that students who are choosing this outdoor orientation are more likely to retain and more likely to earn higher GPAs than their peers. It's tricky, right? Because maybe the kind of person who likes to do this is going to be more successful anyway. So correlation, causation, hard to know. But this article is just talking about like the things that are built into spending time outside together in our personal skill development, right? Like we're just all hanging out together. Community, tradition, the things that you're building into spending a week together are going to be the things you remember in terms of tradition, and then also really helping student leadership. So I think it's interesting to explore.
I can just tell you, anytime you overcome challenges together and you're more vulnerable, like you would be on a big hike, if you start to realize I need these other people to encourage me or even to carry my pack or right. All of that brings tighter bonds.
Yeah. And don't you also think, I mean, a part of that is not being distracted, right? When we talk about things like flow, when we're like, you have to do something that's challenging enough to keep your attention so that you're not bored, but not so hard that you're just overwhelmed and like, oh my gosh, we can't do it. Having that experience with a group of people where you're like, yes, this is hard, but we're overcoming obstacles and we're focused on what we're doing as opposed to being on your phone or being able to watch TV or whatever.
So I just think this is such a no-brainer. If you are blessed with a campus in a beautiful environment, right, to put this together just in your own backyard. But then if you're kind of, challenged with your location, maybe doing like what Brian did and having something intentional. We're going to go to Big Ben or somewhere that's different and beautiful.
It reminds me of that lab kind of idea, right? Where it's like, we're going to be in a lab together and we're going to be practicing all of these student development things instead of just talking about them in a classroom. So it's great, but we do need to have Brian on. I'm making a mental note to myself. All right, the last article I have is about really promoting school spirit in college athletics. This is really interesting. The whole article is about how, depending on how you experience athletics on your campus, it actually can be a great rallying piece for your students where, every Saturday at this time, we're all going to be in the same place. We're going to be cheering for the same things. It's a way to get students out of their room. It's a way to really encourage this idea of school spirit for our students. And so this article is actually very practical. It's like, these are the things that these schools have done in order to get students to come. A huge piece of that is just awareness. Like, how are you talking on a campus about games? But Matt, I was thinking so much of that is about where your school is located and how much competition for students' attention you have, right? I just passed through Zephyr, Texas, where I promise you when they play football, everybody in the whole town is going because there's not a lot of, that's what they're doing. There's not a lot vying for their attention. Versus if you're in a bigger city where you have students who are going home every weekend right. So thinking about, especially for our smaller rural schools, you probably don't have as much difficulty getting your students to come because there's not a lot of distractions. Anyway, one of the things that a school did that I really love, University of Delaware, they created a $15,000 scholarship for students who attended all 6 home football games. They put their name in a hat and then they drew it and they gave them $15,000 as a scholarship. Wow. Isn't that awesome? So this is a great article if you're really struggling with that. It has some really practical pieces in there. All right, that is the State of the Union. Let's talk about curiosity.
Thanks, Rachel. I mean, I think this State of the Union, there's a lot that sparks curiosity, right? So all of those articles dig in deeper. I think there's a lot of really great ideas and things to build on.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I want to go back to the book that we've been covering. We don't have it because we forgot to bring that book too. Oh, but there it is. Popped up in the corner. It's called Seek. And we're at the end of this book. So you remember that we've covered his drive theory about how you're going to engage with people and how you're going to listen to them, and practicing curiosity as a way of being. And he sort of ends in a cautionary note on curiosity. So we're going to do our cautionary tale. And then the next time we talk about books, we're going to talk about some more exciting things about curiosity. But one of the things he says, one of the very last chapters in this book, are the limits of curiosity. And he really talks about how you need to understand, first of all, the difference between limits and boundaries, which I appreciate the difference here. He says that limits are things that you are not capable of, right? So like my limit is I can't fly. Like I can't just fly around in the sky. That is a limit that I need to embrace, right?
It's true.
And a lot of times our limits are about reducing risk and harm. If I think I can fly and I go jump off a building, I'm going to have some harm because I didn't understand the limits of what is real in the world. But then he talks about boundaries as a way that you are kept safe and comfortable. So maybe I could do something crazy like run a marathon. Maybe I could run a marathon, but I have some boundaries around that, and I'm not going to be running a marathon because that's the limit or the boundary that I've put on it. Does that make sense, the difference between those two?
Yeah, I think you could unpack what your boundaries are on that, or what would keep you from wanting to do that.
Right.
But yeah, I think I experienced that this summer, right? So when I climbed a 14er for the first time in my life, and now I'm like, well, this is a thing that I actually can do. And yet one of the boundaries is about, I don't know, is it a limit or a boundary where I'm like, I can't spend all of my time getting ready to climb all the 14ers, right?
Yeah.
I need to put some boundaries so I protect my time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, really relevant, especially as I think about our audience and in student development, academics, higher education, because there are always, in fact, I would say almost unlimited ways for you to be curious about things, right? There's new people all the time. There's all these facets of our students' lives, whether it's social or psychological or academic. Like there's so many questions that we can ask. There's so many ways for us to be curious. And sometimes I think the hard part is knowing, yes, our limits. You literally cannot invest in every single student on your campus. It's impossible. You don't have time for that. You couldn't do it if you tried. But then also your boundaries, which, let's be honest, a lot of us are not great at. And saying like, here's the time and the place and the way and the who that I actually am able to be curious about people and be very present with them, instead of spreading myself so thin that it's like every student that's in crisis that I come in contact with, I have to be thrown into that crisis.
Rachel, I think that's so important, maybe even to say it again, because so many of our listeners, they're so invested in their students, but sometimes they don't have those boundaries to protect them.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I don't think it's nefarious, but I do think sometimes our institutions reward boundary-less behavior, right? We do want you to engage with every student. We do talk about customer service and how if a student needs a thing, we need to show up for that. And, we have quick turnaround times and don't leave them waiting and, all of those sorts of things. And I would say, I think sometimes our students and parents have an expectation of that, right? I need a thing and I need you to do it. And helping to say that's actually not an emergency and we can talk about it tomorrow, I think is a really important piece. So the author of this book has a couple of ways to help you craft those limits and boundaries. The first one is he says, there's 3 questions you should be asking when you're thinking about where to invest your curiosity. The first one is, am I the right person to do this? Matt, we were saying this is related to your deciding what kind of business you want to be involved in. Do you want to talk about that a little bit before I unpack this?
It's really helpful. So this is from Seth Godin and what he calls the fulcrum of innovation. And so he breaks out, kind of draw a triangle and ask yourself 3 questions. Can it be done? So I think this is limit, right? Can it be done? Is it worth doing? Which I think is part of the boundaries. And then the third is by you. And those 3 things, back in the day when I would teach, all of my classes, my students all heard this. I think it's so important for evaluating big decisions, Um, can it be done? Is it worth doing by me?
Yeah.
And a big piece of that is sometimes it's humbling to just to answer it correctly. No, not by me. That
Yeah.
I'm really not the right person to start to take this idea anywhere. I don't know anything about engineering or right, but for everything that you're doing to really use those three things to help you with that decision.
So when it comes to curiosity, this idea of, am I the right person to do this? We're talking about it in a really relational way. So sometimes it's like, do I have the kind of relationship with this person where I should be saying, hey, what's going on? I want to help you solve that. Help me, figure out what the best thing to do for you is. And Matt, I was talking with Sherry about how so often, especially people who are really committed to students, they would say, I'm always the right person to do this. I always can create the relationship with the student so that I can help them. I get a referral on the student. I've never met them before, but I am the right person to go and figure this out because I'm committed and I know what I'm doing. And that's the place where you have to say, hold on though. Is there somebody else who already has that relationship that then can do that work? Because your job is not to go save everyone. You have limits on what you can do. And you need to be able to say, yes, this is one of my students and I'm going to solve this problem. Or no, I know they're connected to you, so I'm going to ask you to solve the problem.
I think that's one of the great things about Ferris 360, and the way that it allows you to have the initial connection with the student, but then when you get to that realization, like, no, there's other relationships they need to be connected to, and to have an easy way to kind of have that bridge to the right person.
Yeah, because one of the things he says about answering, am I the right person, is to say, if I'm not, who might be, right? And that's where we need those visible relationship constellations to say, oh, I actually see who the right person might be. Matt, it also makes me think about this conversation that I am always encouraging schools to have with their faculty, which is a faculty member has a different relationship with a student than student success staff, right? Or student development staff.
Or someone in the res hall.
Right. And so there is, in that position of being a faculty member, there are things like, I have to give you a grade. You could fail my class. My job is to teach you these things and to make sure you're progressing in your academic journey. And so sometimes we have to remind faculty, you are not the right person for this student to pour out all of their counseling woes to, because of the position that you have, right? And what we have to do is to make a pathway between what the faculty member can leverage and saying, but I know the right person for you to talk to about this.
Well, that takes me back to when I was in the classroom and I had students who were really deeply struggling, and to know I'm not the right person. I care, and me, like if there is no one else to do it, I'm going to lean in because the student needs help.
Yeah.
But to be real about my limitations in that, and there are people who are professionally trained like you that I could hand them off to.
Yeah. It's funny. I want to give two examples of this because I think it is so important to be able to assess. So I have told you before about, I was doing career counseling for a student who was in a Master of Counseling program. And the faculty member sent him to me with kind of like a back channel of like, I don't know that he's going to be a great counselor. Can we do some career stuff around his skills and giftedness and whatever? So I gave him all these assessments and it came back like he's like a accountant engineer, right? Really good with numbers, really good with facts, like super smart, very, very gifted. And so I went through all of his assessments and I was like, hey, so help me understand why you want to be a counselor. And he's like, it is the hardest job there is. Like when I'm in my classes and when I'm doing counseling, it just takes everything, all of my mental power to do counseling. It's the hardest job I can imagine. And if I can do it, I know that I'm like really have worked hard, put my mind to it. And I'm like, hey, I don't want to be rude to you, but counseling's very easy. It is so easy for me, right? If
Right.
you want me to have a hard job, that's engineering. I don't know how that's the hardest job that I can even think of, right? So maybe as you're saying, wow, I really hate this thing I'm doing, but it's going to be so impressive when I accomplish it. That's not reflecting on who you are and what your talents are. And I would say we need to spend some time thinking about, we always talk about it like writing with your non-dominant hand, right? There are just things that make me feel mad when I have to do them. And I need to make the right assessment to say, maybe I'm not the right person to come up with a step-by-step plan tied to calendar about how we're going to accomplish a thing. That's Z's job, right? And I'm not the right person to do it. The other example I want to give you is thinking about my friend who's a nurse. We've talked about Kendra tons of times. She's a nurse and she's so good at dealing with physical pain. She's so good at it. Like she starts to tell me stories about things that happen in the ER and I'm like, stop, I cannot listen to this, right? Well, for her, that's not a burden. She doesn't feel overwhelmed. She's not like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. But for me, I'm not the right person. If you break your leg, I'm probably not the person that you want to have in the room with you. However, if you're having really deep emotional pain, I will show up for that all day long. And it's not going to make me squeamish and I don't want to turn away from it. And I don't get uncomfortable. I'm like, let's dive into this. And this is a thing we can do. So just thinking for Matt, for you and I, and for everybody on our team, and then also all of our listeners to say, where are the places where I really am the right person? You really want me in the room if someone's having an emotional crisis. And where are the places where I'm going to say, I need to have some boundaries about that, because although I could do it, I am not the best person to show up in that way.
You know, I was thinking about Scott in the book, and so applying this to what he was talking about when he went to political rallies, and he was curious about the people, all of these people who are going to these rallies who are totally different than him. He's curious about it, but he also is able to go because of his nature, right? There are others who would just want to start a fight, right, or wouldn't want to put themselves. It would not be wise to put themselves in that situation. And so, I mean, that's like an extreme way of thinking about curiosity and how to apply yourself in an area that you start being curious about. But maybe, I don't know, I think that's what Scott's talking about. Like, hey, I know that there are things that I've done because I was curious about it, but also know yourself well enough to know, don't put yourself in a bad situation.
Yeah, for sure. The second thing that he asked about is this the right time? So yes, I'm the right person, but is this the right time for me to dig in and be really curious about things? And I appreciate, he says, first of all, you need to know what your emotional bandwidth is in this moment to be able to say, like, you know what, I have a lot going on that I'm managing myself. And although I may be the right person, probably not the best time for us to engage in a conversation like this, or for me to dig into whatever's happening. He has a great quote from Nadia Boltz-Weber, who is a Lutheran pastor. And she says, you need to make sure that you're always sharing from your scars and not from your wounds, which I think is really powerful, because sharing from your scars is you've processed it and you understand it's resolved. Sharing from your wounds is, man, there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on that I am not able to articulate or really understand yet. So I think that that's really helpful.
Very wise.
Also thinking about, so your emotional bandwidth, and then also what is your energy level, which thank you for the permission to be able to consider, like, do you have the capacity to be present in whatever the thing is that you're digging into right now? And it's okay for the answer to be no. And I think oftentimes we don't ask the question. And even if we do, we're like, it's fine. I'll just do it. Right. I was thinking about examples of this. And when I worked in a bakery, I had a mom who was on the phone with her business, and she's trying to order for me. And she has her 4-year-old son who's like pulling on her jeans. And she says to the person on the phone, hold on one second. And then she turns to her kid and she's like, I am not available to you right now. Do you understand? And he was like, yes. And she's like, okay. And then she got back and finished her phone call. But it was so impactful to me because I was like, there's a person who's like, my kid's important and my job's important, but I can't multitask this and be successful at either. So I'm going to put some boundaries here so I can finish this thing so that then I can be really present with my kid, which I think is a really important thing for people in higher education to internalize.
Well, I was just thinking about why it's so important to have your partners on campus, because there are times when it's like a baton, like a relay race, where it's time for you to really slow down, and hopefully you've found a really good partner that you can hand off some of these things to.
Yeah, for sure. So that idea of, is this the right time? Can I be present and patient? Can I say to a student or to a colleague, hey, I really want to talk about this, but I can't right now. Can you come in tomorrow morning and we will talk about this? Because you are doing them a service when you say, what you are saying is very important and I want to be present and I don't have the bandwidth right now. So can we do it another time? Which I think is it's just a good question to ask. And also thinking about this idea of, is this the right time? I've told this story forever where I had a student that I was chasing down and a lot was going on with her. And I finally found her and I was like, come to my office. And she came in, she was all dressed up because she was about to go to work. And I was like, listen, I'm really concerned about you. What's happening? And she started to get teary-eyed. And she said, Rachel, I really want to talk to you about all of this stuff, but I have to go to work. So I can't cry and I can't dive. You can't be curious about what's happening with me right now. It is not the right time for me. I'll go down the hole and I won't be able to come back. Can I come back on Tuesday and we'll talk about it? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Giving her permission to be able to set that boundary and be like, this is not the right time for me, I think is so powerful. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I want to say about that. So related, this idea of the third question is, do I know when to stop or slow down when I'm curious? So how am I paying attention to red lights and yellow lights that tell me either, hey, that's enough, or you need to proceed with caution as you're digging into whatever with somebody else, with politics or issues on campus or whatever. How do you recognize what those red and yellow lights are? Do you want to say something about that?
Well, I just took a whole trip thinking about me in elementary school, and there were a lot of times when whether that's daydreaming or being very interested in this topic, and so wanting to get more into the encyclopedia or whatever, right? When it was time to move on because the teacher was starting to get, I saw her yellow light and then the red light. But
you're like, I ignored the yellow light, but then I saw the red light, and I was like, but for real. So when he talks about red lights, he's talking about knowing in what situations would continuing my curiosity lead to negative consequences, which is what you're saying, right? Like, I'm so interested in this thing, but we're all going to lunch and I'm going to get in trouble if we keep talking about this, right? Or if I keep pursuing this. Matt, I think of this, it is so hard when we're talking about students to recognize red lights that they're sending us and to say our students are whole people, they are autonomous, we cannot make them do anything they don't want to do. And when you're relentlessly pursuing a student and you're giving them every opportunity and you're saying I can help you and you're doing all of the stuff I preach about all the time, and they're like, get away from me, right? Mm-hmm. Like you've said, like, and this is why it's important, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how I'm going to help you. And they're like, I don't want your help. Ignoring that red light is incredibly disrespectful to them because they are whole people and they get to make decisions about what's happening. And also, we've had this conversation with so many deans of students, so many VPs of students that say, you do your best and sometimes students have to go, but you don't know what new door that opens for them. Their story doesn't end with you not being able to save them in college, right? They have a whole life ahead of them and they're going to look back and be like, here's what I learned and here's what I did next and here's the path that I pursued. And so having the courage sometimes to say, listen, I'm going to stop being curious about what's happening because I have done what I know how to do and I respect the fact that you're like, get out of my business, right? I think is really, really important there. Anything to add to that?
Well, and just from a time management, so one more day of really over investing in that student who's sending you all the red signals, spending that time with them and having that same rejection and frustration versus there are other students who just a few minutes with them could make a huge difference.
Yeah. And they would welcome it, right?
Yeah.
They would be happy for your curiosity about what's happening with them. So the other thing he talks about is this yellow light. And that is when we are curious for convincing and not for understanding. When you find yourself in that position, you need to pump the brakes and be like, hold on one second, what's happening with me, right? This idea that I'm going to ask you all of these questions about something I don't understand. And I think we apply this to first generation college students, to Pell college students who are different ethnicity than us, students that are different gender than us, that we can have really good intentions where we're like, help me understand what it's like to be you on this college campus. And as long as you're showing up in that spirit, I think it makes sense, right? Because we're trying to figure out what are the right pathways, how can we make this experience better. But when you start to find yourself in a place where you're convincing them instead of listening, college really is the right thing for you. You really can't afford to pay for it. This is the right major for you. When you get in that place, that's a place to be like, hey, hold on one second. I feel like it's not curiosity anymore. And it's just either mining their experiences for my entertainment. Like, tell me about what it's like to be however you show up in the world, because I'm entertained by that. It's novel to me. Or I'm trying to change your mind. You're telling me that you want to go home and not finish college. And I'm like, it's a terrible idea. And let me tell you why, right? We talk about this all the time with academic recovery, where we say, you did a bad job last semester, and I'm going to tell you what you need to do. You need to learn how to study. You have to go to tutoring. You have to do this. You have to do this. Well, that's not being curious. That's trying to tell a person how to be. And what you have to do is pump the brakes, go back and say, help me understand what happened last semester. And I moved far away from home. My mom was sick. I was overwhelmed. I hated my major, blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay. Now we can figure out together what's the next best thing for you to do. So just being very aware of when that spirit in you kind of turns from, I'm really curious to, I'm going to convince you what I'm saying is the right thing.
Or you're my new qualitative research subject.
Right. Yeah, for sure. This author suggests the 80-20 rule, which is that you spend 80% of your energy in the people who are closest to you, who are kind of in your immediate circle, and that you reserve 20% for new experiences and new people and kind of adding to that circle, which I think is really, really helpful. I think especially, if you're in higher education and also have a family, sometimes you just come home and you have no reserve. You're like, I don't even know who you people are that I'm living with, but I can't pay any attention to you because I gave it all away today in good work. So being able to say like, no, I really need to make sure that I invest in the people for whom I am the right person. And I do have a responsibility to them. And then for this other 20% of my time, I'm going to kind of expand my circle and find new people. Okay. The last thing that I want us to talk about, which I really love, and that is, he says that curiosity is contagious, which I think this is really true. If you think about, my favorite people are curious, and it may be that they just have always started out curious, but he says, who we surround ourselves with impacts how we think and behave in the world. That's psychology. Like, there are mirror neurons that are like, be like the people you're with, because they'll like you better if you're more like them, right? And so thinking about how do we take this idea of curiosity and make it contagious. And he says the very first thing that you have to do is you have to articulate that as an important value. I think about the president of Sacred Heart, where he's like, the important value is presence. What he's saying there is be curious about each other. You should know each other and you should ask questions and tell the truth about what's really happening with you. And articulating that as a value then calls it out in other people. And we've talked before about how when you call something out, then you see it more often, right? You're like, oh, I am surrounded by curious people. So I love that. Anything to add to that?
No.
This idea of modeling. So when we talk about values, we talk about something that you choose, something that you prize, and something that you act on. And so if you think about the value of curiosity, how are you modeling things like asking a lot of questions, telling people you don't know the answer to that, learning about others in a really intentional way. And I don't know if you saw in the book, I've never heard of this before, but there's a whole national campaign that's called No One Eats Alone. It's for high schools. It's for like K-12. Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
So there's a No One Eats Alone lunch day where teachers have done curriculum beforehand to talk about, like, we should be curious about each other. We should want to learn about each other. Who knows? And then they mix everybody up in the lunchroom. You have to sit with different people and you get a cue card that's like, what country would you like to live in? And then everybody talks about it. What animal would you like to be? And then everybody talks about it. But the idea is not only to be inclusive, to say like, hey, I've never talked to you before. Tell me about who you are. But also that we should be very curious about everything around us. Isn't that smart?
It's really good.
I was thinking it would be super fun to do in college where you would just have lunch groups, like sign up for a lunch group. We're going to put you at tables. You're going to sit with people maybe that you don't know. And then we're going to do a guided conversation around just things like, what kind of animal do you want to be? Okay. The other way that you can model this curiosity in your job is to really embrace curiosity as an identity, which I love. So not just that it's a value, but it's like, man, when you run into me, I'm going to ask a lot of questions because I don't know the answers. And I'm just a very curious person. And I was telling you when I taught the FYE class, I started, and Z was reminding me, Discovery 2, I started with a group of 17 students that I've never met before. And our first class period is just, tell me where you're from. If I'm coming to your town, what are 2 things that I should do? Like, where should I eat? And tell me something to come and visit that's novel. And I learned so much about my students, and they learned about each other. And we set up that whole experience as everybody here is a teacher and a learner, right? Everybody here knows something that I don't know, and I know something that you don't know. And we're just going to be in this class together, and we're not going to have experts. We're just going to show up in our full self and talk about what we know about. It's such a great way for them to identify in that very first class, this person is curious about me. And when we're talking about helping a student choose their major, they better feel like you're curious about them and not like you're bossing them or trying to get them to hurry up and choose a thing, right? It's really important that you've established that curiosity as part of your identity in that kind of program. So I learned a lot of really good stuff from my students.
Yeah, I just took a whole trip of what would I tell someone if they came to Bellevue, Washington? What were the things that I would tell them? First, I was thinking about Bellevue, but I mean, in the state of Washington, within an hour, here are things you could do.
Yeah.
That would be really
well, it's
amazing.
fun, we used to do for FYE, I used to do a scavenger hunt where I would do that for Abilene, right? Because you have a bunch of people come from Dallas and they're like, there's nothing to do here. And I'm like, have you had donuts here? I don't think so. Have you had this? Have you seen this? Have you done this? Right? So that play of, you know a thing and I know a thing, and we're going to learn about each other and really find a lot of commonalities often, right? We can agree on good food most of the time.
Hopefully. Well, going back to Sacred Heart, I wanted to look at their mission statement. I'm not going to read it to you, but what's interesting is what the president is doing is modeling their mission statement. Being president is a huge part of these pieces. Like, we want you to maximize your own and others' health and your well-being and quality of life. And it goes on. You can look it up, but it's so good. And just thinking about what are things that you could do based on your university's mission statement that you could bring out and encourage or model others to be curious about. Thinking of my alma mater and ACU's mission statement, how could I live that out? What are ways that I can encourage my students to talk about it and think about it?
And Matt, there's something there about, I was thinking about encouraging students to be curious about an environment that they've never been in before. And a lot of times, if you don't feel totally secure, you're afraid to ask, like, why do we do that? And what is that? And how does that happen? But I think there's a really helpful conversation to have with students about if you show up in a place and you literally, I mean, it's funny, but it's true about how I feel about showing up in Texas. I literally don't understand half of what is going on, right? But embracing that as a curious identity and just being like, why do we do that? Why are you saying that? Why is that interesting to you? Why do you call it that, right? It's a really nice way to show up in a place where you feel uncertain and have a concrete thing that you can be doing to try to understand, how do I fit here? How does this make sense? What are the rules? How do I embrace this community now that I'm part of? I love that conversation for freshmen. So anyway, the other thing he says about that is like, hey, show up in spaces that you're already in. You don't have to pick a new space to be curious in. So just look around, what spaces are you in and what can you wonder about there? What kind of deep curiosity can you have? I was thinking about, even on Cap and Gown, like, what should we talk about, you guys? What are you interested in? What are things that you're like, I've always wondered this, or I'd like to hear somebody talk about this, or I know a person who knows a lot about this and I would love to hear them. That's a great place to bring that curiosity that we have and that you have into the space that we're in. And just thinking about, as I'm taking classes this semester, thinking about, I said it before, but we're all teachers and we're all learners. And when I go to a campus and I'm teaching them about student success, I'm a teacher. I know what I'm talking about. But there's the majority of the time where I'm a learner. And people are saying things and I'm like, that's so remarkable. I want to hear more about that. Showing up in the world that way, I think, is the spirit of what we're saying with curiosity.
I mean, that really is the power of being in higher education, right? Is that you're surrounded with smart people and you're able to explore ideas. So I think getting into the place where I appreciate what Scott had, as he's concluding his book and saying, here are a couple of things like cautions for you, but ultimately like how to be wired for in your identity to be curious so that you can really embrace it. You can have these fun turns. You learn a lot of things, and what you're able to do just in how you engage your students and also your colleagues.
Yeah,
it's powerful.
For sure. So he has in there a curiosity quiz. It's based on a psychological inventory. I think Bailey has the link for us. I think if you just, let's see, I don't know if I have what could you Google? Maybe just curiosity quiz if you're joining us by podcast.
The Greater Good from Berkeley.
Okay. So that would be fun just to do and to talk about results with students, or just for you personally to know, here's kind of what my curiosity quotient is, and then take steps to improve that. I always like a good quiz,
I guess you're curious.
Yeah, I guess so. Okay, you guys, thank you for joining us for today. Next week, we are going to be talking to James Langford, who is our CIO. Has had a very long experience in higher education, specifically around technology.
But he's a linguist.
He's so fascinating. He loves languages, and he actually, I have known him almost my whole life because he taught with my dad in Manhattan, the Manhattan Church International Mission. So he was teaching English to foreign students for 20 years probably before he started in higher education. So got a lot of really interesting things to talk to him about. Otherwise, go and be curious. Have a great day.